liberalism seems to be about the individual against the state, and even the individual against the other individual. And technocracy seems to play into that. It's about individual experts running the show. None of that kind of discourse says anything about solidarity. The Brexit discourse, I think, says something about solidarity. The Trump discourse says something about solidarity. Populism says something about solidarity. So where did solidarity go? And is there a more benevolent kind of solidarity beside the type that's being handed out to people now as an option?
Well, let's pick up on where Margaret left off. So the notion of what economists did with free trade in the 80s and the 90s. This begins with the notion of the abstract individual who wants to maximize their welfare, and they do this through the consumption of various goods. And internationally comparative advantage means that we should ship jobs here because then you'll get your stuff cheaper, et cetera, all of which is true. And again, as Margaret said, this leads to massive redistributional effects. And basically, this is part of why the 1% is the 1% and everybody else isn't. Now, where does solidarity go in this? There's no solidarity in that to begin with. None. This is basically individuals in an abstract sense in some kind of global market doing stuff. So solidarity has always been bound by the nation. Democracy has always been bound by the nation. These are inherently national institutions. Now, that doesn't mean that they're nationalist. But if those protections are eroded, then a national or nationalist reaction is incredibly easy to find, because it's very easy to say, who are these others? Who are the ones who are threatening us? Either they're taking our jobs, or they're threatening our culture, or they're invading our schools, or whatever it happens to be. So to go back to an earlier comment that you raised, is it the question of rights being eroded, or is it the question of benefits being taken away? Well, in Europe, you see both. And actually, here in the United States with Bernie Sanders, we saw both, because there are people who think that their fundamental liberal rights to non-interference by the government are being encroached upon, and you could call that a right reaction. You can see a reaction which is part of the Trump coalition, which is a claim to the American economy and the protection of the American worker, which is very much a nationalist reaction. But you can also see throughout Europe in particular, Podemos, Syriza, the Corbyn Labour Party, a nationalist reaction which is deeply suspicious of international trade, international entanglements, the euro, etc., that also wants to protect the nation. They just have a very different definition of who's in and who's out of the nation. So solidarity rises and falls with democratic control of the economy. And once you cede this to international forces and abstract individuals, you get that kind of cosmopolitanism, which doesn't sit well at all unless you happen to be a member of the cosmopolitan elite.